Hi, I'm Hannah Ross. I'm a gardener and florist here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'd love to show you around my garden. Come on in.
All right, Hannah, well, thanks for having me out today. Tell us about your background. I know you're a florist and you run your own company, but you also have a beautiful garden here. So if you could tell us a little bit about your background, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a gardener and a florist. I fell in love with gardening in high school. I had a really amazing horticulture teacher. I kind of fell into her class and she's still a dear friend. And so I've kind of been in a very roundabout way pursuing gardening and farming ever since then. I wound up learning about sustainable farming in graduate school. I went for environmental studies and did my research with farmers from various communities of refugees in Providence, Rhode Island, and got to work on a lot of different farm properties and learn a lot about different cultural crops and ways of farming and traditional knowledge systems, and really just fell in love with the way that they grew in small spaces in a very layered, integrative, natural fashion, and have kind of been pursuing learning about different methods of farming in small spaces ever since then.
Okay, and so the specialization in flowers, when did that happen for you?
Yeah, that happened kind of by accident. I was working for a couple different nonprofit organizations doing garden education, and I think that it started when I ran across a book on floral design. I've never been interested in floristry up until about 5 or 6 years ago, because I think I saw it as this very kind of stuffy art form that was pretty removed from nature and how flowers exist in the garden. And I came across a book called Bringing Nature Home that showed a way of working with flowers that felt really just like a breath of fresh air to me. It just looked like flowers were swept up from the garden and really existed in their natural form with all of that light and space and interesting variation of color and texture. And I just fell in love with that idea, and it kind of felt to me like a natural extension of the gardening that I loved. And so I just started playing around with it. And around that time was offered the chance to garden in this space. And so this has become my little kind of laboratory playground for learning how to grow flowers and for continuing to grow food. And not long after that, I started doing floral design as a business.
All right, so I want to show around and show off your beautiful garden here. And yeah, talk a little bit about the business side of it and how that sort of happened and what sort of stuff you guys are working on lately.
Sure. So when I started playing around with floral design, I met just a total kindred spirit named Nicole, who's my business partner now. Her background is in graphic design, and so she brought the design expertise, and I brought the interest in gardening and learning how to do cut flower production, and we sort of melded our skills. And she had already started a floral design business called Wylde, and I worked with her and helped her out for about a year, and then we decided to go into business together. And so Wylde is a floral design studio that really is inspired by nature, and we work as much as we can from our garden and also in partnership with local growers throughout the Piedmont. And we do flowers for weddings and for weekly deliveries and for small events and the like. And so we're growing as much as we can here for our business, and it's really amazing to be able to draw from all of the interesting variations of color and shape that happen in the garden that are just so different from anything that we could get from our sort of national floral wholesalers. It's just, there's so much more life to our work when we get to cut straight from the garden, bring it to the shop, and make something that doesn't look like anything close to what you'd buy in the grocery store from a traditional florist.
I know in the vegetable world, we get the same thing. People are like, what? How did you, what? I don't
How
even,
does it even look like this?
Yeah, or does it taste like this, you know?
Exactly.
So this garden here, and as I said, we'll show you everybody around here, and it's beautiful. Some of this is flower production for your business, and some of this is like vegetables for your family, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So usually about 75 to 80% is flowers and the rest is food. This year with COVID-19, I've kind of pivoted a little bit, and it is probably 50-50 flowers and food.
All right, and we've connected because of the no-till and regenerative farming stuff. So let's go look around and show off some stuff.
So this is the garden space. It's about 1/8 of an acre within the fence line, and we are just outside of downtown Raleigh. It feels like such a nice little sanctuary, but the space that I have here is divided into permanent raised beds, and I've got 8 beds that are about 65 feet long by 3 feet wide. And I've also got 8 boxed in raised beds. And so the way that I kind of manage the space is that mostly my long rows are for cut flower production, with a few exceptions. I've got a big tomato trellis here and some more vegetables this year than usual. But typically the long rows are reserved for cut flower production and also for a lot of perennials and bulbs, things like that. And then my boxed in raised beds are for vegetables and herbs for my family's kitchen.
Okay, so let's show off what you got behind you there. What's going on over here?
Yeah, so this bed I just seeded with sunflowers today. And so I transitioned this from my spring crop of snapdragons and have direct seeded a few different varieties of sunflowers. And so these first couple of beds right now are summer cut flowers. And so I've got a really nice mix of materials that'll give me a lot of different color and texture for our weekly flower bouquets for our deliveries, really throughout the summer and into fall.
Okay, and I see some great, I'm obviously in the vegetable world, but some great, the tomatoes look unbelievable down there.
Thank you. Yeah, I did 50 feet of tomatoes this year, which I'm really excited about. As much as I love growing flowers, I also am really crazy about growing food and about finding varieties that are really beautiful. I kind of see ornamental gardening and vegetable gardening as something that can really be seen as one and the same. I see so much beauty in vegetables and really love kind of nerding out on fun colors and shapes and just interesting different things to incorporate into my kitchen and into our flowers as well. Sometimes we even take vegetables and put those in our arrangements. We did that with sugar snap peas this spring, and we even sometimes do it with cherry tomatoes that are unripe. So there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination, if you will, between the kitchen and the floral studio. I
think there's that crossover between home gardening and market gardening, and really market gardening is kind of like an extension of home gardening.
Absolutely.
So I see standardized beds here, I see drip tape, I see, you know, mulched walkways. I see a lot of the stuff that, like, in the world that I live in, and it just looks perfect in the scale.
Thank you. I've learned so much through the No-Till Growers podcast, which is where we connected. And really, so my background in learning about growing is very much from observing farmers. And to me, I really feel like there are amazing lessons to be learned from the ingenuity of farmers and their ability to really listen to their land and to kind of use thrift and use creativity to work with the land in a way that is regenerative and that is also super productive, which is really important even on a home garden scale. So even though this is a small space, I really try to implement systems for efficiency and for ease of working and for ergonomics, and just so that I can move about this space in a way that is easy, relatively easy, and efficient in terms of cost and labor. And there's so much to be learned from market gardeners to implement on a home scale. Perfect.
Yeah, I see a ton of production. It's very efficient, and I can tell that you enjoy working out here.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And it hasn't always been so easy. The first year that I grew out here, I was very inundated with weeds and was still, I hadn't really learned about no-till yet. And so I was really inverting a lot of the soil and thinking that I had to double dig everything. And I just absolutely was overrun by weeds. And so kind of year 2 to 3, I started learning a lot about how to build soil and layer organic matter and implement more systems so that this space can kind of take care of itself a little bit better, which makes it a lot more reasonable for me to run and manage a space of this size while also having other jobs during the day and having busy wedding seasons with flowers. And I don't always have a full-time schedule to be out here. So it's nice to kind of be able to step away when I need to, and it doesn't take all of my time by any means, but I do choose to spend most of my time here.
All right, so the other half of the garden here, you have these wooden sort of raised beds?
I do. And so I was lucky enough to take on the care of this garden space with sort of most of this infrastructure already existing. So I'm working in wooden boxed raised beds that have probably need to be rebuilt soon. They've been here for about 7 years or so. But this is mainly where I grow vegetables and herbs for our kitchen. And I love just doing a lot of companion planting, growing a lot of edible flowers and herbs mixed in with vegetables. We've got a ton of peppers and eggplant out here right now, lots of nasturtium and basil, lots of cucumber. I also really love making medicinal teas, and so I've got tulsi and lavender and calendula and some different things for teas and other herbal formulations.
Obviously the plants look really healthy, but what have you found to be the difference between, you know, this style and the in-ground?
Yeah, so I treat the soil much the same way in that with these boxed beds, I'm doing a lot of layering of compost and leaf mold, and that's really helped the soil to stay nice and healthy and for these not to dry out too quickly. But definitely these boxed beds are a lot more cumbersome to water than are the permanent raised beds in the other half of the garden, because I just water all of these by hand.
It's probably also challenging to be adding more material year after year.
Yes, for sure. These require a lot more kind of repeated, pretty much every time I pull a crop and plant something new, I'm adding more organic matter, whereas with the permanent raised beds that are in ground, I can go a couple of successions without having to really add a lot more compost.
All right, so I recognize this this trellis system.
Trellis to make you jealous?
But you took it up a notch. You had to like paint everything green so it looks pretty. Of course, it looks amazing.
Yeah.
These tomatoes are incredible. But not only that, but talk about this the planting you have going on the side here.
Absolutely. So I'm a big fan of companion planting. Anytime I can, boost biodiversity and hopefully repel pests and kind of boost the vitality of the main crop, I'm all about it. And so I've got the tomatoes all the way down the row, interplanted or companion planted with basil and marigolds. And we use these for a lot of different things. We obviously are eating the basil, and the marigolds are an edible flower, but we also cut from both for the floral studio, and so there are a lot of overlapping uses here, and also as a great way to help repel pests with the marigold and keep these tomato plants super healthy, because I've babied them a lot, and so I want them to succeed.
Looks amazing.
Thank you.
All right, this area jumped out to me when I walked in. I just saw so much different color and some vertical growing. What's going on in this area here?
Yeah, I love this little space this year. It's got just a really fun mix of color, and so the back half of this bed is all perennials that are kind of coming into their third year since I planted them. And so I've got a lot of perennial plants that are really coming into their own and are a lot taller and more productive than they were in years past. So it's fun to see the garden take shape kind of beyond what I would have imagined for it. And mixed in with perennials over here, I also have some cucumbers on the trellis. I've got some clematis vine that we use as a cut flower. I've got a border of basil as a nice companion plant to pick from. And just a lot of good food mixed with flowers.
And you encourage the intermingling and
I do.
diversity.
I love to see the mix, and I love to I think the more I learn as a grower, the more I'm stepping back and letting things intermingle and observing the combinations of plants that are working and the combinations of plants that are not, rather than having to have everything be so compartmentalized. And so this is kind of an experimental corner of the garden to that effect, but so far it's working really well. I've got some delicious cucumbers that I'm picking over here, mixed in with these perennials, some Mexican sour gherkins, some lemon cucumbers, and this all kind of transitioned from cut flower production in the spring of sweet peas usually go on this trellis, and kind of further towards the front of this bed I've transitioned that sweet pea bed over to more cucumbers and pole beans. So it's always kind of changing and unfolding and switching back and forth between food and flowers.
I'm amazed at how many different things you're growing here.
Yeah, well, I can never decide.
I know, I'm the same way. It's awesome.
It's definitely a mix, but that keeps things interesting. And a lot of things I grow not even anticipating using it for our floral design work, and then I find out that it's perfect for floral design work. I mentioned the vegetables earlier, but shiso is another example of something that I love using as an herb in my kitchen that also makes a great cut foliage. Lemon balm I have growing in a lot of spots as a medicinal herb that has wound up being beautiful in flower arrangements. So I'm always kind of just growing a wild mix of old favorites and new varieties, and just sort of seeing what works.
All right, so as on the florist side of it here,
Yeah.
is that a hard sell to customers, like selling them sort of alternative style bouquets and arrangements with like things they would never think of? How does that go down?
So it can be tricky to sell them on the front end if they've never seen our work, but for the people who have seen our work, I think it really sparks a sense of wonder. And if you think about the same thing with mass marketed foods, the flowers that you find at the grocery store are very uniform. They don't have a scent. Everything kind of looks the same, and there's very little character to it. You can't really envision it growing out in a garden or out in a meadow. And yet the things that we're able to make for people have a really natural sense of movement and have a lot of interesting variation and have amazing fragrance. And I think that that kind of sparks that wonder and also kind of a sense of nostalgia for people. And so we try to keep things really interesting. And usually, yeah, it can be tougher for people who have a more traditional aesthetic, but I think that we bridge that gap in a really interesting way, and people do get on board once they see it.
All right, talk about a little bit about, you'd like to source locally as much as possible.
We do.
And that's a big part of your company and you as a florist too.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I have obviously a fairly small space as farm scale is concerned, and so we can't grow anything close to all of the flowers that we would use for a big wedding in our garden space. We can grow kind of interesting accent ingredients, but we can't grow everything that we need. So the bulk of our garden flowers really go to our weekly deliveries and little special arrangements we'll make for smaller events. But then when wedding season comes along, we work really closely with local farmers who have more land to source as much kind of that quantity and bulk of material locally as we can. But in wedding season, that does also require usually buying from a wholesaler of things that are shipped in really from all over the world. But we'd prefer to use much less of those materials. So we're kind of in an interesting spot being really, really small scale growers and also being florists, where we're trying to educate and show our customers what is in season and what is possible beyond a peony or a rose or a ranunculus, because there are just so many beautiful things that are available locally, and then kind of matching the style and the vision of our clients with what local farmers are growing and what we're growing in our gardens, and creating really customized looks that are as sustainable as possible. And there's no end point or arrival point for that. It's very much a continuum and a work in progress that we're kind of every year we're bringing people along a little bit more and showing them a little bit more of our process. And I think the hope is that over time people will trust more of that, more of our expertise and knowledge in sourcing and in knowing that we are going to find something really beautiful and special for them locally, and that we don't have to buy in boxes of white roses to make their wedding look beautiful. But it's a work in progress.
So I know we're all in challenging times right now, but obviously a big chunk of your business has been selling for weddings.
Yes.
So how is that going down right now? What do you guys, how are you handling it?
It's been really hard, as it has been for everyone, but I mean, yeah, so much of our business is doing flowers for weddings. That's at least, I'd say, 75% of our business. And so when people can't gather it's really hard to, you know, be relying on that income stream of making really beautiful gatherings come to life. It's basically what we do. And even the smaller gatherings have mostly stopped. We've had a couple here and there, but really our work, we're, you know, down from a very, very full-time schedule to really only being able to work a couple of days a week. It's a childcare challenge for my business partner, and so there are so many layers to the challenge of operating a small business during COVID-19. Early on, we completely shut down everything because we were just so nervous even to go and do a delivery, and really felt like adhering to the stay-at-home order was the best thing that we could do. And now we are doing contact-free deliveries every Friday, and we're doing just only garden flowers. We're making really beautiful bouquets with the garden flowers, but it's such a tiny proportion of the work that we were doing. And another part of the work that we really love and that was a great kind of revenue stream for us is workshops. And so usually every month or so we would host a floral design workshop in our studio and really cram people in, and obviously that's off the table now too. So we're trying to get creative, but it's really slowed down.
Okay, and a big part of the wedding stuff is the seasonality of certain flowers for a wedding that's planned at a certain time of year.
Yes.
So you talk a little bit on that?
Oh, that has been the biggest headache. Obviously, we're happy to do it for our clients, but it really is an interesting process of we have a lot of correspondence always with our clients, developing a vision for them and pulling images of flowers and foliage that will be in season and in their color palette. And so we'll kind of pull a visual mood board for them of everything that we would use. And so we have, for example, all of our April and May weddings have rescheduled either for this fall or for next year, most of them happening at totally different times than their wedding was originally planned. So now we're having to go through and redo all of those plans.
So you're like, you can't get this flower this time of year.
Yeah, and not everybody really understands that. And so it's definitely a process of educating and spending a lot more time on the design than we anticipated. There's been a lot to it.
All right, well, I wish you the best of luck. Hannah, thank you so much for having me by today. And I know we've been trying to connect for a while. Obviously, things have been crazy. And I hope to do some collaborating with you in the future with educational stuff.
Absolutely.
We're not that far from each other. And so how can people follow along with what you're doing in your business and stuff like that?
Yes, thanks for asking. We would love for people to follow along. So the name of our business is Wylde. It's spelled W-Y-L-D-E. So you can find us online at wylde.co, or you can follow us on Instagram at Wylde Flowers.
Awesome. I'll leave links down below for all that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.